It is 4 o'clock in the morning. The street is dark. The gas lamps are still burning. A small boy, 7 years old, is being shaken awake by his mother on a straw mattress in a damp cellar room in Manchester, pronounced Manchester. He has slept in his clothes because there is no fire and the room is freezing. His shoes are stiff with yesterday's mud. His breakfast, if he gets one, will be a piece of stale bread rubbed with bacon fat. By 5:30, he will be standing inside a cotton mill beside a machine taller than he is, with 16 hours of work ahead of him before he is allowed to come home. This boy is not a slave. He is not a prisoner. He is a Victorian child. And for millions of children like him, this was simply what childhood was. Imagine you were born in Britain in the middle of the 19th century. Imagine you were born poor. Not poor in the way we sometimes use the word today, but poor in a way that meant your body belonged to the people who fed you. Your hands, your feet, your eyes, your small fingers, all of them had a price. And from the moment you were old enough to stand by a machine or crawl through a chimney or pick coal out of a moving belt, someone was going to put you to work. This is the story of what life was really like for a child in the Victorian era. Not the picture book version with frilly dresses and rocking horses, not the Christmas card image with snow on a cottage window, the real, hard, frightening and quietly heroic story of the children who built the modern world with their own small hands and were paid almost nothing for it. We begin in a country that is changing faster than any country has ever changed before. To understand the Victorian child, you first have to understand the world he was born into. When Queen Victoria came to the throne in 1837, Britain was already the workshop of the world. The Industrial Revolution had been running for nearly a century. Steam engines were pumping out the mines. Power looms were clattering in the mills. Railways were spreading across the countryside, throwing up bridges, cuttings, tunnels and viaducts, pronounced viaducts. Coal was being torn out of the earth in vast quantities. Iron was being smelted in furnaces that lit up the night sky. Cotton was pouring off the spindles of Lancashire, pronounced Lancashire, in lengths longer than any country in history had ever produced. All of this took people, not just men, not just women, children. Britain in 1840 had a population of around 18 million, and a remarkable proportion of them were under the age of 15. Families were large. Infant deaths were common. The poor had children early and often, because children were not, in this world, a cost. They were an asset. A child who could earn a shilling a week was a child who could help feed his brothers and sisters. A child who could not earn was a mouth to feed in a house where every mouth mattered. The cities were growing at a speed that nobody had ever seen before. Manchester, Birmingham, pronounced Birmingham. Leeds, Glasgow, pronounced Glasgow. Bradford, Sheffield. Each of them was swelling with workers pouring in from the countryside, drawn by the promise of wages, pushed by the collapse of rural work. They came on foot, in carts, by canal, by railway. They squeezed into rooms that had been built for half as many people. They drank water that was often contaminated. They breathed air that was thick with coal smoke. And they sent their children, almost as soon as those children could walk, into the factories, mills, mines, and workshops that the new economy demanded. This is the world a poor Victorian child was born into, a world of smoke and machinery, of crowded rooms and crowded streets, of long hours and small wages, of cholera, pronounced K-L-R, and typhus, pronounced typhus, and tuberculosis, pronounced tuberculosis, and 100 other diseases that swept through the slums every few years. But it was also a world of life, of street singers and pie sellers, of horse-drawn omnibuses and gas-lit shop windows, of music halls and penny dreadfuls, of grandmothers who told stories by the hearth, and brothers and sisters who slept four to a bed and kept each other warm. The Victorian child did not know he was living in a hard time. He only knew that this was the time he had been given. Let us step inside the home he came from. Picture A. Working-class home in the East End of London in the year 1850. It is not a house. It is 2 rooms in a tenement building on the 2nd floor, up a dark, narrow staircase that smells of cabbage and damp plaster. The family who lives in those 2 rooms, a father, a mother, 6 children, and a grandmother, would, by our standards, be considered desperately overcrowded. By their own standards, they are doing reasonably well. They have a roof, they have a fire when there is coal. They are not on the street. The front room is the family room. It contains a table, a few chairs, a small range for cooking, a shelf with cups and plates, a chest where clothes are kept, and a single window looking out onto a courtyard where lines of washing hang between the buildings. The back room is the bedroom. It contains 2 beds. The parents and the youngest baby share one. The other 5 children share the other, sleeping head to foot, 3 at one end and 2 at the other. There is no bathroom. There is no running water. Water is fetched from a standpipe, pronounced standpipe, in the courtyard, sometimes shared with 20 or 30 other families. The toilet is an outdoor privy, pronounced privy, at the end of the yard, again shared with everyone in the building. In winter, it is freezing. In summer, it stinks. Cholera comes here every few summers, and when it comes, it takes children first. The food on the family table is simple and monotonous. Bread, always. Tea, weak and reused. Potatoes, a little cheese, a herring on a good day, a piece of bacon on a Sunday, sugar in small quantities, jam, if the mother can afford it. Meat, for the children, is a rare event. Perhaps a piece of mutton stew on a Sunday afternoon, eaten slowly, so it lasts. Clothing is patched and patched again, handed down from older brother to younger brother, from older sister to younger sister, until the cloth itself gives up. Shoes are a particular problem. Many poor children go barefoot in the warmer months and wear shoes that do not fit in the colder ones. A child with no shoes in January is a child whose feet may be permanently damaged. The Victorian working-class home is small, crowded, often cold, and often hungry, but it is not loveless. The grandmother in the corner tells stories. The mother sings while she scrubs the floor. The father, when he comes home from work, lifts the youngest onto his knee and asks about the day. There is laughter. There is affection. There is the deep, unspoken closeness of a family who has nothing in the world but each other. And in this home, the moment a child is old enough to work, that child goes to work. The age varied. In the early Victorian period, before the laws were tightened, children as young as 4 were sometimes found in workshops. In the cotton mills, the standard age was around 7 or 8. In the coal mines before 1842, boys and girls as young as 5 worked underground. In domestic work, running errands, minding babies, helping with washing, children as young as 3 were already useful. There was no question in most poor families of whether a child would work. The only question was when and where and at what. Let us follow a boy of 7 into one of the great cotton mills of Lancashire in the year 1840. The mill stands beside a canal 4 stories high, built of red brick, with rows and rows of small windows. From those windows, even at 5 in the morning, light is already glowing. The mill never really sleeps. Its great steam engine deep in the basement is being stoked back to life. Its long shafts and leather belts are beginning to turn. Its 1,000 machines are waking up. The boy walks to the mill with his older sister. They have left home before sunrise. They have eaten a piece of bread on the way, dipped in cold tea. In his pocket, the boy has a small parcel, bread and a scrape of dripping, pronounced dripping, for his midday meal, which he will eat without stopping the machine. At the gate, an overseer checks them in. Inside, the noise hits them like a physical blow. The clatter of the looms, the whir of the spindles, the hiss of steam, the rumble of the shafts overhead. A grown man new to the mill will sometimes have to step outside on his first day just to recover his hearing. A child quickly learns to live inside this noise as if it were the sound of breathing. The boy is a piecer, pronounced pea-ser. His job is to mend broken threads on a spinning machine called a mule, pronounced mule, which moves back and forth on a track, spinning hundreds of threads at once. When a thread breaks, and threads break constantly, the piecer must dart in, find the broken ends, twist them back together with his small fingers, and dart out again before the mule comes back. If he is too slow, his fingers may be caught between the moving parts. If he is too tired, he may fall into the machine. Children who fall into the machines are sometimes killed. More often they lose a finger, a hand, an arm. The boy works for 16 hours. He stands the whole time. He is not allowed to sit. He is not allowed to talk. He is allowed a short break for his midday meal, eaten beside the machine. He is allowed another short break in the afternoon. He is allowed nothing else. If he begins to fall asleep on his feet, and he will because he is 7 years old and has been awake since 4, the overseer carries a leather strap. A blow across the back of the legs or across the shoulders wakes him up. The air in the mill is hot. It is humid because the cotton spins better in moist air, and the mill owners deliberately keep the rooms damp. It is thick with cotton dust, which the children breathe in hour after hour, year after year. By the time those children are 20, many of them will have a hacking cough that will not go away. By the time they are 30, many of them will be dead from what was then called consumption, pronounced consumption, and what we now call tuberculosis. At the end of the day, the boy walks home with his sister. He has earned perhaps 2 shillings for the week. His sister has earned a little more. Their combined wages added to their parents' wages will keep the family in bread and rent. He goes to sleep almost as soon as he eats. He is up again at 4 the next morning. This was not a rare experience. In the cotton districts of Lancashire and Yorkshire, in the wool districts of the West Country, in the silk mills of Macclesfield, pronounced Macclesfield, in the lace factories of Nottingham, pronounced Nottingham, hundreds of thousands of children worked exactly like this, 6 days a week, for most of their childhood. And the cotton mill, terrible as it was not the worst place a Victorian child could end up. The worst place was probably down a coal mine. Britain in the 19th century ran on coal. The steam engines burned coal. The factories burned coal. The railways burned coal. Every house in every city burned coal. The demand was enormous and growing every year. To meet that demand, men, women, and children went deep into the earth. In the early Victorian period, before the law was changed in 1842, mines used child labour on a massive scale for one simple reason. Children were small. They could fit into spaces where a grown man could not go. Picture a coal mine in South Wales or in the Black Country around Birmingham. In the year 1841, the shaft drops hundreds of feet into the ground. At the bottom, the seams of coal run out in long, narrow tunnels, sometimes only 3 feet high. Down those tunnels, a grown man cannot walk upright. He cannot even crawl easily, because the roof is low and the floor is wet. This is where the children worked. The smallest children, sometimes 5 or 6 years old, were employed as trappers. Their job was to sit alone in total darkness beside a wooden door deep underground. The door controlled the flow of air through the mine. When a coal cart came rumbling along the tunnel, the trapper pulled a string, opened the door, let the cart through and closed it again. Then he sat back down in the dark. He sat there for 12 hours. Picture that for a moment. A child of 6, alone, in a tunnel hundreds of feet beneath the earth, in darkness so complete that he cannot see his own hand, for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, with no one to talk to, with nothing to do between the carts, with only the silence of the mine, broken now and then by the distant rumble of the seam being worked. Children who survived this work often described, in later years, the strange mental world of the trapper. Some of them talked to themselves just to hear a voice. Some of them sang. Some of them sat in a kind of stunned half-sleep, waking only when the cart approached. Many of them developed what we would now call severe anxiety, or claustrophobia, pronounced claustrophobia, or what their parents simply called nerves. Older children worked as hurriers. Their job was to drag the loaded coal carts along the low tunnels to the bottom of the shaft. A leather belt was strapped around the child's waist. A chain ran from the belt between the child's legs and back to the cart. The child crawled on hands and knees, sometimes through water, sometimes through mud, pulling a cart that might weigh several hundred pounds. The skin on his knees and the palms of his hands hardened into something like leather. His back, after a few years, was permanently bent. Girls worked as well as boys. In some pits, girls and women worked stripped to the waist because of the heat. When a parliamentary commission of 1842 finally investigated the conditions, the photographs and drawings that came out of half-naked girls harnessed to coal carts in the dark shocked the British public so deeply that Parliament passed a law banning all women and all boys under 10 from working underground. It was the first time the state had reached into the private workings of an industry and said, "This far and no further." But the law did not change everything overnight. Boys over 10 could still work in the mines. The mines were still dark, dangerous and brutal. Explosions of fire damp, pronounced fire damp, methane gas igniting from a candle or a spark, killed dozens, sometimes hundreds, at a time. Roof collapses crushed men and boys without warning. Floodwaters drowned whole shifts. A boy who went down the pit at the age of 10 could not be sure he would come back up at the end of the day, and yet, every morning, boys went down, because their fathers went down, because their families needed the money, because there was, in many mining villages, no other work in the world. If you were not in a mill and not in a mine, where else might a Victorian child be working? You might be a chimney sweep. This was perhaps the most haunting trade of all. In the cities of Victorian Britain, almost every house had a coal fire, almost every coal fire had a chimney, and almost every chimney, sooner or later, had to be swept of soot. The chimneys of the time were not straight, simple shafts. They were narrow, twisting, often only 9 inches across, with sharp bends and constrictions. A grown man could not climb them. So, for most of the 18th and early 19th centuries, the cleaning was done by small children, sent up the chimneys by men called master sweeps. The children were known as climbing boys. They were sometimes as young as 4. They were often orphans or workhouse children, or the sons of desperately poor families who had sold them, in effect, to a master sweep for a small fee. The master would feed them, clothe them in rags, and put them to work. The boy went up the chimney barefoot, naked, or almost naked, with a brush in one hand and his back and elbows pressed against the rough brickwork. He climbed by friction, his skin scraped against the soot and the brick. By the time he had climbed a few flights, his elbows and knees were bleeding. The master, standing in the fireplace below, would sometimes light a small fire of straw to encourage a slow boy to climb faster. The smoke rose. The boy climbed. At the top, the boy scraped down the soot, which fell into a sheet held in the fireplace below. Then he climbed back down, covered in black grime, his lungs full of soot, his eyes red, his skin raw. The injuries of climbing boys were terrible. Some suffocated in chimneys, some got stuck and could not be pulled free in time, some fell from rooftops. Almost all of them developed by their early teens a particular kind of cancer, known then as chimney sweeps cancer or soot-wart, caused by the constant pressure of soot against their skin. It was the first occupational cancer ever identified in medical history. Reformers tried for decades to ban the use of climbing boys. Laws were passed, but ignored. Mechanical brushes were invented, but householders preferred the boys because they did a more thorough job. It was not until 1875, after the death of a boy named George Brewster in a chimney in Cambridge, that Parliament finally enforced a real ban. By then, an entire generation of small boys had spent their childhoods crawling up the inside of brick walls in the dark. You might be a match girl, in factories making the small phosphorus matches that lit Victorian homes. Young girls, many of them barely teenagers, dipped wooden splints into a yellow phosphorus paste. The fumes of the phosphorus breathed in day after day slowly destroyed their jaws. The condition was called phossy jaw, pronounced phossy jaw. The jawbone would begin to glow faintly in the dark. It would rot, abscess, and eventually have to be removed, leaving the girl horribly disfigured and often unable to eat. You might work in a brickyard carrying heavy loads of wet clay on your head. You might work in a glass factory, blowing bottles in front of furnaces so hot that the skin of your face peeled. You might work in a dressmaker's shop in the West End of London, sewing by candlelight from 6 in the morning until 11 at night, until your eyes failed and you went blind in your 20s. You might be a mudlark, pronounced mudlark, a child who scavenged the muddy banks of the River Thames at low tide, looking for bits of coal, rope, copper nails, anything that could be sold for a halfpenny. You might be a crossing sweeper with a small broom who cleared a path across a muddy street for a gentleman in exchange for a tip. You might be a flower girl, a watercress seller, a costermonger's, pronounced costermongers, assistant, calling out wares at the top of your lungs in a London street. You might simply be in a workhouse. If your family could no longer feed you, you and your siblings might be sent to the parish workhouse, where you would be separated from your parents, given a uniform, fed a thin gruel, taught to read just enough to memorize scripture, and put to work picking oakum, pronounced ochkum, which meant unraveling old, tarred ropes by hand, hour after hour until your fingers bled. A child of the workhouse was, in many ways, a child of the state. The state fed him. The state clothed him. The state would, in due course, apprentice him, pronounced apprentice, out to some master, often in a trade that needed the cheapest possible labour. Charles Dickens, who had himself worked in a blacking factory as a small boy, wrote about these children with a fury that helped to change the country. Oliver Twist, asking for more, was not a fantasy. He was, more or less, the experience of tens of thousands of children every year. But if you survived all of this, if you grew up in a mill town or a mining village or a London slum and lived to see your 10th or 11th birthday, what was the rest of your life like? Let us spend a day inside the world of a more ordinary working-class child, not in the mills, not in the mines, not up a chimney, just an ordinary child in an ordinary street in the middle of the Victorian century. You wake up in a bed that you share with 2 or 3 brothers. The room is cold. Your mother has already lit the fire downstairs, and the smell of frying bacon, if it is a good week, is drifting up through the floorboards. You dress quickly, because there is no point lingering in a cold room. You pull on the same clothes you wore yesterday. Your shoes, if you have shoes, sit by the door. Breakfast is bread and tea. The bread is yesterday's, the tea is weak. You eat standing up or sitting on a stool by the fire. The baby is in a cradle in the corner. Your father, if he is home, is already eating his own breakfast quickly before walking to work. Then it is out into the street. The streets of a Victorian town are not the streets of today. They are unpaved, often muddy, full of horses and horse droppings. Sewage runs in open gutters in the poorer districts. The air smells of coal smoke, of horses, of frying food, of unwashed bodies, of cheap soap, of damp wool. The noise is constant. Wheels on cobbles, the clip-clop of hooves, the cries of street sellers, the shouts of children, the rumble of distant trains. If you are lucky, you go to school. By the middle of the Victorian period, more and more children attended what were called ragged schools, free schools set up by churches and charities to teach poor children to read, write, count, and recite Bible verses. The classrooms were big, the benches were hard, the discipline was strict, and the teaching was often unimaginative. But you learned your letters, you learned your numbers, you learned, perhaps for the first time, that the world was bigger than your street. After 1870, when the Education Act was passed, school became more widely available. After 1880, it became compulsory, pronounced compulsory, for all children up to a certain age. By the late Victorian period, a poor child in Britain had a real, if imperfect, chance of becoming literate. It was the first time in British history that this had been true on such a scale. If you did not go to school, and many children still did not, you worked. You ran errands, you minded younger children, you sold newspapers on the street corner, you delivered milk, you carried parcels, you shined shoes outside a railway station. You were, even at 9 or 10 years old, a small economic actor in a vast urban machine. But there were also moments of childhood, real childhood, even in the hardest streets. You played in the gutter with marbles, called marbles or alleys or tors. You played hopscotch, pronounced hopscotch, with a piece of chalk. You spun a top. You flew a kite from a piece of waste ground. You played a game called knucklebones with 5 small pebbles, or the actual knucklebones of a sheep, picked up after a butcher's shop had thrown them out. You skipped rope. You played hide and seek among the carts and crates of a market. You collected things, brightly coloured scraps of paper called scraps, which Victorian children prized like little jewels, cigarette cards in the later Victorian years, which showed soldiers and footballers and birds, buttons, marbles, bird feathers. A boy's pocket, by the end of the day, was a small museum of treasures, none of them worth a penny, all of them precious. You went to the music hall, and if you could sneak in while or stood outside, listening to the songs through the open door, you learned the words, you sang them, walking home in the gas-lit street in a clear, high voice that your mother would scold you for if she heard. On Sundays, the rhythm of life changed. You put on your best clothes, if you had any. You went to church or chapel, pronounced chapel, with your family. You sat through long sermons. You ate a proper meal. You walked, in the afternoon, to visit a grandmother or an aunt. The streets were quieter. The factories were silent. Even the poorest families felt, for a few hours, the dignity of rest. On great occasions, a royal visit, a public hanging until 1868, a fair, a regatta, a circus coming to town, the streets filled with crowds, and the children were in the thick of them. A Victorian child grew up knowing the smell of crowds, the press of bodies, the excitement of a band striking up around the corner. He also grew up surrounded by death. This is the part of Victorian childhood that is hardest for us today to imagine. In the slums of the great industrial cities, the infant mortality rate, pronounced mortalité, was staggering. In Manchester in the 1840s, more than 1 in every 4 children died before the age of 1. Of those who survived, many more died before the age of 5, of measles, of whooping cough, pronounced whooping cough, of scarlet fever, of diphtheria, pronounced diphtheria, of diarrhea, pronounced diarrhea, caused by contaminated water. To be a Victorian child was, almost certainly, to lose at least 1 brother or sister, and very often more. To stand by a small wooden coffin in the front room, to see your mother's grief hidden behind a black shawl, to go back to school the next day, because life went on, because work went on, because the rent had to be paid. Children died, mothers died, many in childbirth, many of infections that we now treat with antibiotics in a few days. Fathers died in industrial accidents, in mining disasters, in epidemics. A child of 10 might have already attended 4 or 5 funerals. He might have a younger half-brother or half-sister born to a stepmother after the death of his own mother. The family in a Victorian working-class home was often a patchwork, stitched together over and over by death and remarriage. And yet, against this background, Victorian childhood was not unrelievedly grim. There was a fierce, deep love within these families. Mothers worked themselves to exhaustion for their children. Fathers, however tired, played with them on Sunday afternoons. Grandmothers told them stories of the countryside they had come from, of harvests and haymaking, pronounced haymaking, and village dances. Children loved each other with the closeness of siblings who had nothing else. And slowly, painfully, the world was changing for these children. Throughout the Victorian century, a tide of reform was rising. It came from many sources. From doctors who were horrified by what they saw in the slums, from clergymen who could not square the suffering of children with the teachings of Christ, from writers like Charles Dickens, Elizabeth Gaskell, pronounced Gaskell, and Henry Mayhew, pronounced Mayhew, who interviewed the poor and wrote down what they said. From politicians like Lord Shaftesbury, pronounced Shaftesbury, who spent his life fighting for the rights of factory children, mining children, climbing boys, and the inmates of lunatic asylums, pronounced slums. Law after law was passed. The Factory Acts limited the hours children could work in textile mills, then in other factories, then more generally. The Mines Act of 1842 banned women and small boys from working underground. The 10 Hours Act of 1847 limited the working day for women and young persons in textile factories. The Chimney Sweeps Act of 1875 finally ended the use of climbing boys. The Education Acts of 1870 and 1880 made schooling available and then compulsory for all children. The Prevention of Cruelty to Children Act of 1889, the first of its kind, made it a criminal offence to mistreat a child in your own home. These laws did not solve everything. They were often poorly enforced. The inspectors were too few. The employers found ways around them. The poor were too desperate to refuse work, even when it was illegal. But the laws marked a profound shift in how the country thought about children. For the first time in human history, on a national scale, a child was being recognized as something other than a small adult. A child had rights. A child had a special kind of vulnerability. A child needed protection, not just from outsiders, but sometimes even from his own family, his own employer, his own poverty. The Victorian century invented modern childhood, not because Victorians were always kind to children. Often they were not, but because by the end of the century, the idea had taken hold that a child was supposed to be at school, not down a mine. A child was supposed to have time to play. not to be working 16 hours at a machine. A child's body and mind were supposed to be allowed to grow before being put to work. The cost of arriving at that idea was paid by millions of small bodies in mills and mines and chimneys and workshops over nearly 100 years. By the time Queen Victoria died in 1901, the British child had not been freed from poverty, or hunger, or disease, but he had been freed, in law at least, from the worst of the old system. Imagine one last time that you are a Victorian child. Not at the start of the Queen's reign, when childhood was for sale to any factory owner who needed cheap hands, but at the end of it, in the year 1900. You are 10 years old. You live in a working-class street in Leeds, or Liverpool, or Newcastle, pronounced Newcastle. Your father is a labourer. Your mother takes in washing. You have 4 brothers and sisters, and you have lost 2 more in infancy. Your home is 2 rooms on the ground floor of a back-to-back terrace, pronounced terrace. There is no bathroom, but there is a tap in the yard and a privy at the end of the row. You go to school every weekday. The school is a big brick building with high windows and rows of wooden desks. You learn reading, writing, arithmetic, pronounced arithmetic, geography, a little history, a great deal of scripture, and a song or two. You are taught by a tired but determined young woman with chalk on her sleeve. You sit beside 30 or 40 other children, and you know all their names, and they know yours. After school, you do not go down a mine. You do not stand at a spinning mule. You run home, you eat a piece of bread, and then perhaps you have a job. But it is a small job. You deliver newspapers on a paper round in the early evening. You mind a baby for a neighbour for a few pennies. You help your mother with the washing on a Monday. You earn a little money, but you are not, any longer, the family's main source of income. You play in the street with the other children. There are still horse-drawn carts, but there are also electric trams in the high street now, and bicycles, and the first motor cars beginning to chug past, terrifying the horses. There are gas lamps that come on in the evening, and somewhere in the distance, a music hall is opening its doors. You will probably leave school at 12 or 13. You will go into a trade or a shop or a factory. You will work hard for the rest of your life, but you will have learned to read. You will know your country and its history. You will perhaps write a letter to a cousin in Canada, where some of your family have emigrated. You will live in a world where childhood, however imperfect, is no longer simply a span of years spent feeding machines. This is the gift that the Victorian century, for all its cruelties, finally gave to the children of Britain. Not a perfect childhood, not a safe childhood by our standards, but the beginning of childhood as a separate, protected stage of life. A space, however narrow, in which a child could be a child before becoming a worker. We sometimes look back at the Victorians and see only the top hats and the parlours, the Queen on her throne and the Empire on her maps. But the real story of Victorian Britain is also a story of small hands, of 7-year-old boys in cotton mills, of 6-year-old trappers in coal mines, of climbing boys in chimneys, of match girls in match factories, of mudlarks on the Thames at low tide. They built the modern world. They threaded its looms, and pulled its carts, and swept its chimneys, and dipped its matches, and sold its newspapers. They paid, in their bodies and their childhoods, for the wealth that filled the houses of the rich, and slowly, painfully, generation by generation, the country they had built began, at last, to look back at them and see them not as small workers, but as children who should never have been working at all. Their names are mostly lost. Their photographs, when they exist, show small, thin, serious faces peering out of the past with eyes that have already seen too much. We do not know what they hoped for, or what they feared, or what they thought of on the long walk home from the mill at the end of a 16-hour day. But we know this: they were not weak, they were not broken, they were children who carried, on small shoulders, a weight that no child should ever carry, and they carried it somehow with a grit and a kindness and a closeness to one another that comes through even now in the words their grandchildren and great-grandchildren remember them saying. The Victorian century changed Britain. It built railways and factories, cities and empires, photographs and telegrams and steamships. But its deepest change, in the end, was this. It taught a country that a child should not be a tool, that a child's hands were not, by right, for sale, that a small life had a worth that went beyond what it could earn in a day. That lesson did not come easily. It came at a terrible cost. It came in part from the suffering of the very children it eventually protected. But it came. And out of that lesson grew the world that we, their distant descendants, have inherited. We owe them, those Victorian children, more than we usually remember. They worked so that their grandchildren would not have to work the same way. They suffered so that the laws would change. They lived short, hard, brave lives in the smoke and the noise of the new industrial age. And when we sit in our warm rooms with our own children safe beside us, we are sitting, in part, on a foundation laid by their small, tired, courageous hands. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this kind of deep historical reconstruction, please subscribe to Walter Reconstructs History. I make videos that bring lost worlds, forgotten lives, and great turning points back to life in a way that is simple, visual, and grounded in real history. If there is another vanished world, hidden corner of the past, or forgotten people you want to see brought back to life, leave it in the comments. What should I reconstruct next on Walter Reconstructs History?